Welcome back. We're discussing violence against women around the world. We've looked at rapes and sexual abuse in India. Now we turn to Mexico, where 6 women are murdered every day. That's according to an international organization dedicated to reporting crimes against women. It's called femicides, which is defined as the killing of women because they're women. The Mexican government is being urged to put more efforts towards prevention and improving access to justice for victims and their families. So what's behind the violence? From Mexico City, I'm joined by Andalusia Knoll, a journalist who's been covering the issue of femicides in her country. Andalusia, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
That is an alarming figure. 6 women killed in Mexico every day. That number is on the rise. In many instances, the women's bodies are mutilated, they dumped. Why are so many women dying in this way?
I mean, it is a really alarming statistic. You know, just this week we celebrated, International Women's Day, and people here in Mexico were saying we don't have anything to celebrate, faced with this alarming statistic of so many women being murdered, being disappeared, and being raped. I'd say the one word that could sum it all up is impunity. That really what has been happening over the past 2 decades is that when women are disappeared or when they're killed and when their bodies are just found, deserted, I mean, what we had seen in Ciudad Juarez in the over the past 20 years is that nothing happens to the people responsible. Many times the crimes are not even investigated. If they do find the people that are responsible, often they're not charged with anything, or if they end up in prison, they're eventually let go. So this kind of impunity lets other people know, other men that maybe have problems, domestic violence problems, or problems with their wives, their sisters, or whoever it may be. They say, oh, I really don't want to be around this person anymore. If I kill them, nothing will happen. And it's a really alarming thing to see all of this impunity and see that it keeps happening, and the government really has no way to deal with it. I mean, one thing that in Mexico we've seen what has hit the international headlines is the case of the 43 disappeared students from the Ayotzinapa Teachers College. And one thing that we've seen with them is that the government is completely inept in investigating the case, and this is also holds true for many of the cases with these women.
What about legislation that would protect women in Mexico? I mean, the other disturbing thing I read was that only a quarter of the cases that we're talking about are actually investigated.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, there actually is a lot of legislation that is aimed at protecting women. Mexico has signed many international agreements that are supposed to guarantee that women have a life free of violence. And part of these national agreements that Mexico has signed on to is that Mexico has to classify feminicide as a specific crime and recognize that when a woman is killed specifically for her gender, it's different than, say, many of the murders that are happening with the quote-unquote war on drugs that has been happening over the past 8 years. And so the thing is that there is legislation that is set to protect women. Almost all of the states across Mexico have this kind of classification for feminicide, but the thing is that often the crimes, even though they have clear marks that they are gender-based crimes, the judges don't actually classify them as such. So that has been a struggle for both victims, mothers that have been fighting for justice for their daughters who have been murdered, and also for human rights and feminist organizations that in many of these states that they actually classify the crimes as femicides, and that then they will be able to really understand how deep this crisis is and ways to respond to it.
In many instances, we know that women are killed by their boyfriends, their husbands, or their ex-husbands. So what is fueling this domestic violence against women?
I mean, I think it's, women on a whole are considered second-class citizens in Mexico. I mean, in many of the cases where women have been murdered by their domestic partners, there is a long history of domestic violence, and often there really aren't resources for women who are trying to escape these kind of violent home situations.
Andalusia, thanks for being with us. That's Andalusia Knoll talking to us from Mexico City. And that's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter @CCTV America. I'm Arnold Dido in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.